Hello everyone, welcome back to another True Potential Do More With Your Money podcast. So now we know the general election is going to be on July the 4th, but why now? What does it mean for your money? And what happens next? Well, that's what we're going to discuss on this week's podcast with, at the end of the table, Steve Hutton, who is managing partner here of True Potential Wealth Management, the advice firm. We've got in the middle George Bell, our portfolio manager from the investment management team. And right next to me, Daniel Harrison, chief executive of True Potential. Hello, gents.
Hello. Hi, Peter.
It's a good job I'm not a betting man, because on a podcast many months ago, I said 14th of November.
You did.
And it was looking good for a while, but now I'm spectacularly wrong.
It was probably looking right until about 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, I think when they decided to go, wouldn't they?
That's right. Some inflation figures may have had something to do with it. We'll talk about that, of course. Literally everyone thought the autumn. I don't think anybody particularly saw an early election coming. So, I mean, it did certainly catch quite a few people out, probably all of us, in fact. Why now, though? That's there's the question on everyone's lips. Why do you think, Steve? Why are we having a general election in 6 weeks' time?
Well, the summer months are upon us, so that's traditionally the best time to go to the country. He may think that the economic figures are looking as good as they're going to get. Does he think they're going to get any better by the end of the year? Possibly not. He just chose as well to pick a rainy day when he could look really silly stood in the rain getting very, very wet with the guy playing things could only get better at the end of the street.
It was strange to pick a day when, there is a thing called the weather forecast. I'm sure they could have seen that it was going to tip it down at precisely that moment.
You've also got the £2 million media room, which his ex-boss built.
Yeah.
Just so use that.
Well, I think he wanted the picture in front of the front door, didn't he?
Yeah.
But anyway, I know you mean. Steve mentioned there, George, some of the economic news, and genuinely there has been some really good economic news so far this week. Just give us an update on that, if you wouldn't mind, because I think that does paint some of a picture on why we might be where we are.
I think it does. The UK economy's been pretty weak, but it's improving. UK economic growth was 0.6% positive in the first quarter. You've got low levels of unemployment. Unemployment's 4.3%, lowest level which we've seen pretty much over the last 40 years. Wages are growing about 2% ahead of inflation, and inflation's 2.3%, so it's just 0.3% ahead of the target which the Bank of England set. So Bank of England have got some scope to lower interest rates, but actually the timing of interest rate cuts has been pushed out, given some of the components of inflation were a bit stronger. So probably looking at it and saying, well, the economy is shaping up okay, and between now and the original scheduled elections, probably not going to get a huge change in terms of interest rates, so probably encourage them to go.
That's it, George. That's what I was thinking. The one piece of the economic puzzle missing there, so to speak, was that interest rate, which people were predicting it was going to be Q1 this year originally, then kept shifting, then it was going to be next month, June, but that's probably looking less likely now as well, isn't it? So
yeah, exactly. I think, over the next 2 years, looking at Bloomberg there, the market still thinks interest rates in the UK will come down from 5.25% to 4%, but just the timing of when those cuts come through has just been pushed out a little bit further. So.
And also, in terms of economic news, don't forget that we talk about inflation relative to the Bank of England's target of 2%, but really the significance of 2.3% yesterday was against an 11% inflation rate where it was when he came in to office. So he's seeing that as being, this has really come down. My plan was to halve inflation. We've gone way past half, and it's right now pretty much back to normal. So there's as much about that. But Dan, are you thinking that as much about the, let's say, the positive economic news that there was this week? Are you thinking the decision is much about perhaps we're not going to get those interest rate cuts for a little while now? So if you were hanging on for that, you're not going to get that for a little while. Is that what you think?
I think there's a bit of a, it's very hard to predict, by the way, so watch me look foolish, and next month they'll slash interest rates. But I think, you almost think, is this as good as it's going to get? Yeah. Now, this is where you can almost think government are damned if they do and damned if they don't, because as we know, and as George and everybody spoke about at length here, one of the main reasons for high inflation was energy prices from there, especially because of the Ukraine-Russia war from there. It's came down now a lot, and a lot of people are saying, well, yes, it's now at this low level, but it's nothing to do with you, government. It's because energy prices are now cheaper as well. So they got the blame when it was high, because people knew it was the war, but the government, I think, still got the splashback, and I don't feel that maybe getting the full credit for it as well. I'd also maybe query, because every figure George says there is good. I think we've got a UK stock market. You've got the FTSE at record high, and it's sitting, and pleased to say so far it hasn't reacted badly to the news of an election. From there, so you've got that. You've got inflation. You've got wage increases. You've got us growing as well. So tick, tick, tick. But I think if you were to go and ask a man or a woman on the street, do you feel better off? Do you feel the economy's in a good place? I think they'd probably say no as well. So it's an odd one where the figures, I don't think, necessarily match how people on the ground think.
So what you're saying is the fundamentals of the economy actually aren't that bad. In fact, pretty good.
Yeah.
Stock market massive, at its high, as you say, and inflation coming down, to be basically normal. In that case, then, why aren't people feeling better, do you think, Steve? Why is that not filtering through to the polls? Maybe just first of all, actually, just give us, what are the polls saying? I mean, you've probably seen them today as well.
Yeah, I mean,
the trend has been the same for over a year now. I mean, 20 points ahead, is that the
there's a few interesting dynamics coming through. The Labour Party seem to be around about 21 basis points ahead.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, the markets, back to that, is that they don't seem spooked by either party winning, whereas 2019 was significantly different under Jeremy Corbyn opposition. The market seems to be pretty sanguine about what's happening. So that does reflect it's focusing down, it's sort of read ahead and it's looked at what could happen, but equally it's focusing down on better fundamentals coming through in the economy, which is encouraging for us all. Why don't we think we've felt it yet? I think it's been quite an attritional. It was such a shock. The energy price shock, as Dan said, was such a shock to working people. It hurt them significantly. And inflation at 11%, with food inflation probably above that at the time, and other dynamics in the economy, some of the sort of stress of Brexit coming through, I think has hurt people, and I think they're very wary about, and you know what, the press isn't full yet of great news on the economy either, and they're all influenced by the press. So I think they're probably thinking, is there another shock coming? Should I just batten down the hatches a little bit, not go back into spend mode, but sort of, keep my hands on the tiller, as it were, because I don't know really where the economy seems to be going.
Is that not a reason, though, do you think, just to play the sort of counter argument, to have gone long on an election then? Because if what we're saying is the economy fundamentals are strong, it just hasn't filtered through yet, wouldn't then you advise to say, well, go long, go for that November election?
You can't, that's not long though, is it? The summer months, traditionally, there used to be a phrase in the stock market, sell in May and go away. The summer months are generally quite benign for the stock market. He's in a bind because he has to go by January next year, or the first quarter next year. So I think he was probably waiting. To be honest, the news this week, as George has outlined and Dan has said, is slightly better than anyone expected, I think. So he's probably seized the opportunity and thought, you know what, we'll get a better turnout in summer. You certainly get a better turnout with older voters in summer, not in winter. And generally the Conservative Party do better with older voters. So it's probably, he thinks the stars have aligned a little bit.
And also, don't forget the student younger votes, depending on where they're registered, they'll not be at university, they'll be home for the summer. Yeah. So if they're registered to vote at university, then that theoretically could take some of them out of the equation. Yes. They'll tend to vote Labour.
Don't forget, this year you've got to show ID to vote as well, which is difficult. And I think, all sort of any party of political bias apart, the biggest problem for the UK at the minute is getting younger people to vote. We want them to exercise their democratic, rights. And
well, I've noticed today as well, and then we'll come on to see how the markets have reacted, George, in a sec. But I've noticed today as well. He's said this morning. This is Rishi Sunak. I said this morning that there'll be no flights to Rwanda before the election. So I think what this is about is him saying, I've now got some clear dividing lines, which is really simple. If you vote for me, there'll be a flight to Rwanda. The Labour Party have said they won't adopt that policy.
I found that quite worrying, though.
The defence spending point, they've committed to increasing defence spending by 2.5%, and Labour haven't. So maybe what he feels now is he's got more, clear blue water between the two parties on some issues, and you'll see more of that.
If you vote for us, get these policies through. If you don't want those policies, don't vote
maybe
for
he's worked
us.
at. Maybe he thinks that sort of decision point, that yes or no, is stronger than an image of a plane taking off.
We know how controversial some of these are. For all the rights and wrongs, and it's a completely different debate for a completely different day. But you see the amount of infighting in the Conservative Party. It's been wrecked over the last X amount of years now with it, and we have a strong rumour based on the local elections where it went as predicted, which was a poor result for the Conservatives. There has been the odd rumour saying there was going to be another vote of no confidence in Rishi Sunak as well. Now, in my point of view, that's absolutely ridiculous. That will guarantee they will completely lose an election. But maybe that's been coming along, and Sunak's thought maybe he's agreed the same way, which is this isn't going to look good. Yeah, you've got those defections going on, which again.
Well, there was a funny story I heard last night that. More because obviously what has happened is some of the MPs who wanted him to go along are now finding that they might be looking for a new job in 6 weeks' time possibly, so they're not particularly happy about it. So there was talk last night, I don't think it's serious at all, of more letters going in to replace him now so that a new leader comes in and cancels the election. Can you imagine that?
Well, just
absolutely crazy
to keep your job for another 3 or 4 months.
Well, exactly.
Wild.
Nothing would surprise us.
We are in that sort of slightly odd time.
But on those people with the defections, by the way, I hope they get voted out. And not because I'm blue or red or anything. I find it bizarre that all of a sudden you can go from centre right or far right views to centre left far left views overnight.
It's,
so
disingenuous.
Hopefully the voters see right through that and just say this is quite disingenuous.
We should say as well, by the way, is unlike media outlets in the press and to some extent broadcast as well, although they have to keep it a bit more quiet. We all have our personal views, but in terms of this podcast and this company, straight down the middle. Our job is to manage your money and to do that effectively and give you the best advice that we possibly can. And then we do that. Our job is to navigate any of these changes, and whoever forms the next government, whatever else happens, as we've done in the past, our job is to find the opportunities in that for you. So as a company, we take no view. And on this podcast over the next 6 weeks, right up until polling day, we'll just give it to you straight as it is in terms of a neutral view. As I say, we can all have our personal views of things, but that's not what we're here to do in terms of this podcast. So we'll just give it to you absolutely straight and cut through the noise. On that point, George, we talked about the economic strength in the market. There was a bit of talk around perhaps having a budget later in the year, an autumn budget. Where are we in terms of what sort of external forecasters are thinking in terms of the strength of the economy? Are we having an early election because they just feel they won't have money? There isn't going to be enough liquidity in the treasury to be able to give more tax cuts. Was there any news this week around the underlying strength of the British economy?
Well, in terms of debt, we've got more debt than what we had pre-pandemic. Debt, the level of debt which we've got relative to the value of the economy, it's about 98%.
I'm guessing that's consistent across loads of other countries as well.
Exactly. And what's also difficult is the cost of borrowing for governments is higher as well. So actually what they can do fiscal-wise, they're going to be spending in different areas. They're going to be taking their revenues in different areas, but the level of debt which we've got and the cost of debt is higher than what it was, say, 2019 as an example there. So that's going to be one aspect which will sort of limit the impact in which you can have in terms of the debt situation which we have in the UK economy. But the volatility will come in terms of where does that money get spent and where's it being taken from. In terms of the market, political news tends to be felt most instantly through the currency market. If we look at the pound, it's been relatively unchanged since the announcement yesterday. The pound's pretty weak relative to where it's been in the past. I think it was 140 against the dollar before Brexit, and then settled in a range of around 120, and then went down to around 111 around the Truss budget. It's back at 127 now. I think some of the moves that we've seen over the last week are more driven by the fact that although inflation's coming down, it wasn't as low as what the market was hoping for. It's 2.3%. Market was hoping for 2.1. So you've just seen bond yields which have been pushing up, but all it's done is taken bond yields back to the level which they were in April, and the currency market has just responded according to that. So we haven't seen a huge amount of volatility in the market.
I noticed this morning when I was looking at the FTSE, there wasn't much movement on the back of the announcement.
No.
Do you think more of the movement will come as policies get announced and we begin to see a bit more of what... I mean, obviously no party's going to announce anything that's going to spook markets. I mean, that would be stupid. But will markets be paying a closer eye on that, if you like, on what gets announced over the next 6 weeks, manifestos, versus just the fact of announcing it?
Yeah, once you start to get some plans in place and ideas in terms of what's going to change, that's when the market can digest it. At the minute, it's a bit more speculative in terms of what's... where will it impact? It'll impact currency markets. It may impact the bond market. It may impact domestic UK equity markets, because at this point in time, it's a strong economy. the valuation of the economy in terms of what are you paying for businesses and the profit share that you get as a shareholder. It's actually quite low in the UK relative to what you're paying in other regions. So it's actually been, quite a lot of interest from international businesses in the UK. So
do you think, Steve, that irrespective slightly of who wins, the greater significance is that we're now going to have a new government of one colour or another in 6-7 weeks' time? You've then got a period of stability, in theory, for maybe 4 to 5 years, whereas we've had so much chopping and changing over the last 2 and 3. Do you think that the markets will just welcome, and frankly the public will just welcome, that we're going to get a new, might be still Rishi Sunak with a new team around him, or it could be Keir Starmer with a brand new team altogether, but either way, we're just going to now get some stability. Is that the most significant thing?
That would be what we would hope for. But you look at the polls aren't generally that accurate. It might not be such a slam dunk for either party in this election, and that might be a contentious view because people are looking at a Labour lead thinking, wow, we might get maybe a hung parliament. It's not beyond the wit of man or woman. And then, I remember 1974, we had 2 elections in a year, for slightly different reasons, but if we get stability, someone with a decent majority, then I think it's the best we can hope for, that we get some stability going forward.
Yeah, because your wild card's the Lib Dems a bit, where they've came out today and said absolutely not going to do a coalition with the Tories. But when they were asked about Labour, they said, "Oh well, we'll kind of let's worry about the election first."
Yeah.
So,
and of course, Nigel Farage said he's not going to stand.
Yeah.
So that because he was there, I suppose, waiting to take votes off the right hand side of politics as well. So maybe it's becoming a little bit clearer, or maybe not. But you raised an interesting point. Are we heading for a 1997 style massive Labour majority, or is it a 1992 style surprise? The incumbent stays in, or is it a 2010? We end up with a coalition. I mean, you can't call it, can you?
Don't see. Well, you're given 3 options there. I don't see either of the first 2. I don't see a massive Labour majority, and I certainly don't see the Tories pulling this one out the fire.
No.
So it is the connotation in between that. What will we get? Yeah, I think the minority parties will play a role in this coming forward. Certainly over the next, even if you've got a. Why
don't you believe that? So 21-point Labour lead. It's always been around, say, 18 to 25 points in that kind of window. Why don't you think that will be the end result?
Campaigns have a huge effect on elections. Let's not kid ourselves. And I think it's down to the quality of how they campaign. I don't think it was a great start for Rishi Sunak yesterday, just for the optics.
Yeah.
I mean, really? If you got, why on earth? We're in a podcast room. We're not doing it outside because it's raining today. It's ludicrous. So I don't think he's got off to a great start.
With the guy playing the music down the street, which
that
at one point it just being very awkward when that's really all you could hear.
Yeah, but equally, Keir Starmer doesn't generally come across as the most enthusing guy. So they've all got their challenges. The campaign will be really interesting.
Yeah,
I think,
and the actual manifesto from Labour will be interesting to see as well, because I know Sir Keir came out, I think it was last week or the week before, and said this is what we're going to represent in the build up to an election. But now we obviously need to build a real manifesto around that, and that'll be really interesting, and I think that'll help drive votes or not, because if that stays wishy-washy.
Wishy-washy, did you say? He got a good one.
I didn't say that, no. But credit to you, Peter, I think you were the first person in the country to say that things can only get wetter. I was sat next to you live as we were watching it, and you said it then. The newspapers had it all on later that night. So credit to you, Peter.
There's a future job for me as a headline writer somewhere, I think. But I think you're right, though. I mean, the local elections, I know there's caveats because they didn't include Scotland. I get that. And Scotland's going to be have a big say in the outcome. But they did, if you look at just the local elections in England, they did point to like a 9-point, I think it was, lead, which you think a couple, as campaigns get closer, could that get to 7-6 points? If you did, you are nudging towards hung parliamentarity. So you might be onto something, Steve.
Scotland will make a huge difference because it does correspond with a bit of mayhem in the SNP as well, which were, the last 2 elections, they were phenomenal winners. And, I don't think the Tories will take any votes off them, whereas Labour probably will. So that could be a big swing up there.
Yeah. And Labour are coming from a long way back, because this is against 2019. Yeah. So the swing needed, I know they're on course to do it in terms of the polls, but with the caveats we've just said, but they've got to come from a long way back. There's a lot of, I think there's more don't knows. If you ask, you did some things on the radio, just people on the street getting interviewed, and a lot more just don't know this time round, because there's not a clear. You had Boris Johnson up against Corbyn, light and day difference. Even though people always say, well, they're all the same, but they definitely weren't the same. It feels like there's a harder choice this time.
Yeah, and this has been some of the stick which people have used to attack Labour with, which is we're not quite sure what you stand for. You just pretty much just the same government, but just red rather than blue. From there, I think that makes it harder for the neutral voter, for the open-minded voter. I think you'll always, in British politics, get people who'll always vote right, always vote left. Where it's going to get muddled a bit here is with reform, because they may chop and change. I think if you want the safe bet, you go Lib Dem in the middle. And that's typically what's happened in the past. But this year, and again, you're absolutely right, Peter, what you said before. Everybody should exercise their right to have a political opinion. But at TP, our opinion is, how do we help our clients make more money in a great fashion? How do we look after those clients for many years to come? So we have to navigate, is it going to be blue, yellow, red, a mix, or what have you? And that's darn tricky to do. So, you're asking me, but before today's podcast, what are we doing to prepare for it? And the answer is, well, as you can see here, if anybody's watching, I don't have a script because I don't have a full detail yet. It's almost like Rishi Sunak saying, if you kind of like what's going on right now, and if you want to see a plane going to Rwanda, and you want to see a bit of that, stick with Rishi. Keir Starmer's a bit like, well, if you don't quite like that, but maybe you do like it a bit, but who knows, then vote for us. From there, that's hard for us as a business to get our head wrapped around, because what do I like? What do economies like? Certainty. Something to plan towards, something to work towards. Doesn't matter what the outcome is, as long as you know where we're aiming toward, you can plan, you can adapt, and you can work for it.
But I mean, we've become, well, we always were, but particularly in the last few years, there's been Brexit, we've had general elections, we've had how many prime ministers are on to now, energy crisis, conflicts all over the world. Trump in America, and everything that's gone on globally, and we've managed that billions of pounds of clients' money because we always find the opportunity within that, wherever it is in the world, and the diversification point comes through, and that's how we do it, isn't it, George? So in some ways, you have to just let this noise go over your head, because our job and our focus here is to find opportunities no matter what happens. Yeah, exactly. And a pandemic. Did I even mention a pandemic? We've had in the middle of that as well.
It's a heavy year across the world for elections. It's not just in the UK. So, it's important that we've got diversification. And what I mean by that is you're invested in a range of different countries. You're invested in a range of different businesses which are going to be impacted to different degrees by policy, positive, some more challenged, and therefore you need to navigate that component. And you need to ensure that, the value of the pound's not the key determinant of portfolio returns, and therefore making sure that we are hedging our currency, which essentially means taking exposure to currency across different markets, which means that if you do see volatility in the pound, that's not going to determine the destiny of your portfolio returns. So diversification is absolutely key, not just now. It is, throughout time, and it's proven to be the right strategy which we can take here. Key determinants of the market from here, monetary policy is going to be a very important one. Remember, monetary policy sits independent from government. So I appreciate the government has taken a lot of credit for inflation coming down, but it's an independent decision by the Bank of England there. And that's the same situation across in the States. We've got an election year, but again, an independent Federal Reserve in place as well, who are ultimately going to be determining what level interest rates are, what amount of money is available in the economy and financial system to manage the level of inflation and support growth along the way. So monetary policy, direction of inflation, economic growth internationally, and also corporate earnings as well. Been quite an interesting time where US corporate earnings, so how much profit are businesses making, it's really been centered in the United States. What we've seen since the beginning of this year is that really starting to broaden out, so starting to see better profit growth in the UK, in Europe as well. And that for a diversified portfolio, that's an opportunity in itself.
Which is our focus, is looking after clients' money, as we always do. Just bringing it back though to I mean, the personalities, which I know, I sort of slightly hate to do because it's the wrong bit to focus on, really. But it is what people are going to focus on. You've got to give Keir Starmer a lot of credit. He's taken a party which got trounced just a few years ago, and he's made them credible. He's made them electable. You've been to some events where they've been Shadow Chancellor's been speaking. They've made a real effort in the last couple of years to reach out to business, to get the party more electable, and the polls show that he succeeded in that, Steve.
Yeah, it's a combination of a few things, isn't it? I think he is a far more credible leader to the general public than Jeremy Corbyn was. And the Conservative Party have not helped themselves over the last 4 or 5 years, have they? They've self-combusted. It's interesting what George says there, and I hope everybody that's listening takes that on board, because we're not gamblers. We're certainly not gamblers with our own money, and we're not gamblers with client money. But we don't want clients to be gamblers either. We need to put the faith in people who have all the technology and the data at hand, and also have the skill sets to be able to look through. Because I think personalities can be very, you get spooked by a personality, so you make an irrational, emotive decision in your investments. We're here to stop you doing that. Our decisions are not based on emotion. They're not based on Keir Starmer's popularity. They're based on hard data coming through that we've seen before. We can extrapolate through the markets, and that's what we're here to do. So whether we are apolitical or not, certainly in investment parlance, we're definitely apolitical. Absolutely, we take an agnostic view across and look at the data.
Yeah. Well, I'll bring it back to the personality just for a second, just for some chat.
Trying to get away from it.
I know you're trying to pivot away from that, but that was well done. But I'm going to pull you back. So we talked about Starmer. This isn't a loaded question at all, but just to play devil's advocate, does Sunak, do you think, get a fair press, or does he get a rough press? Because you look at the chaos of a couple of years ago, the ship is steadied to an extent. Do you think he's maybe got, more, maybe not more appeal, but do you think he's getting enough credit, Dan?
I think it depends what you thought about Boris Johnson, is probably the very simplistic answer. If you were someone who voted for Conservative the last time, not necessarily because of your local MP, but because of Boris Johnson, you probably don't like Sunak much, because Sunak was one of the people with the finger was very much pointed at, stabbed him in the back in the end, and said, wasn't me, it was all naughty Boris, and vote for me as leader. And then Liz Truss won that election, that leadership election. Didn't last long, and then Rishi came in, and I think he came in the second time round almost as the safest option at that stage, which is this ship needs steadying pronto from there. So I think if you were a huge Boris Johnson fan, I think Sunak could have 0% inflation, we could have interest rate, everything, and I'm still not sure we get the credit. However, I think there are some good milestones to consider there. The challenge to that, or the stop to that, is, as George rightly says, or he mentioned before, is it actually much to do with the government or not? And this is a hard one, because when times are really bad, government will sometimes say, nothing to do with us, it's the world. But then all of a sudden things get better, and they go, didn't we do a good job from there? So I suspect history, I think, will be kinder on Sunak in 5-10 years' time. When we've gone through some of this, but I don't think he gets the fairest adherence, to be perfectly honest with you, in the country. Maybe that's because he's such a different character to what Johnson. Johnson was bolshy and loud and confident and optimistic. Sunak, by all accounts, is a very likeable guy, really hard-working, really bright. Some people say one of the faults of his is he micromanages things too much as well. Should your Prime Minister be doing that? I don't know. It's a job I've never done, never want to do, by the way, either. But, I think his record's been pretty good, bear in mind
where he started from.
Well,
I'm going to stick with you then, and just, you're not Prime Minister, but you are Chief Executive of a huge company, probably one of the fastest growing companies in England, if not the north of England, if not the wider country as well, employ hundreds and hundreds of people, based in the north, where levelling up was meant to happen, and there was going to be all this investment. What is it? I guess what's your take on the state of play now? But more importantly, I'm interested in, what do you want to see going forwards? What has the next government got to do, whoever it is, to get your backing, if you like.
You've heard me moan, complain, whatever we want to call it, in the past here about how unconservative it feels to run a business, and that's been the case since the Conservatives have been pretty much in either majority or coalition or whatever we want to call it, power over the last few years. Because when you look just at the pure and utter black and white side of things, where employees are paying more tax, employers are paying more tax in terms of looking after the employees, but also in terms of VAT, in terms of just business rates, etc. So it hurts us in that side of the pocket just from pure and utter taxation. The cost of regulation costs more than ever before, and that's not just in terms of paying fees to the regulators, it's in terms of employing more legal and compliance and consultancy staff than we've ever had to do before. That is because regulation seems to be the consensus when you speak to a lot of businesses. It's not just True Potential. Regulation is more overreaching than it's ever been before. So you could say that's not conservative either. It's meant to be light a touch and allow a free market to drive itself. So I think you've got those two things where I think you can, if you're scorecard in this Conservative government, they have let private businesses down with that. We've grew to what you said before, Peter, despite all of that. Because we've got on with it. We've hired excellent staff, excellent members of the team at True Potential. But I also think we've had an excellent strategy which has allowed us to attract excellent, I keep saying excellent, I feel like a politician myself, but we've attracted excellent financial advisors and indeed excellent clients from there as well. But that's despite all of those kind of millstones almost, which we're having to drag around. Imagine if we were lower tax, we could employ more people, we could put more money into business, we could innovate, and we could grow even quicker with that. So what do I want from a new government? I would like to see tax lowered across the piece, not just for personalities, but for businesses as well. I would like to see regulation lowered and actually look at more growth rather than almost a defensive side of things, and this is, people have heard me speak very recently about the advice gap side of things. It's probably a podcast for a whole of a day, but in this room and in True Potential, we look after about 8% of all members of the UK public being financial advisors. That means there's 92% or about 12 million people out there who need to meet people like George, Steve and all of the professionals we've got here at True Potential. I'd love regulation and government, because I'm not complaining about the regulation here, it is what it is, but I'd love regulation and government to say, how do we find a way to compel the other 92% to seek financial advice, but how do we get the capacity back in our industry to do so?
Because there just aren't enough advisors.
There aren't enough advisors, and this is under the Tories' watch. As Retail Distribution Review was 2012, we had 220,000 financial advisors in the industry. Fast forward to today, depending on who you believe, we've either got 40,000 advisors or 20,000. Either way, it's 180 to 200,000 less advisors than we had 12 years ago. Meanwhile, the savings gap's extended via the advice gap extending, and there's 12 million people out there who will demonstrably benefit from firms like us. So we need more pro-business in terms of tax, in terms of support, in terms of regulation. And hopefully one of the parties vying for my vote will be able to offer me that.
And the 20 to 40,000 advisors that you mentioned, we know from our own research that a lot of those will be coming up with their own retirement within the next 5 years. So whoever forms the next government, this is going to be in their interest.
Average age of our industry 60, Peter. It's going to happen.
Well, it's just natural demographics. Steve, what would be a game-changing policy for you then, either as a business, I don't mind, you can answer this one personally if you want, or as a businessman? Dan's given his view on regulation and tax.
I echo what Dan said, to be honest. We need to get rid of all the jingoism, levelling up and all that rubbish. it's London and South East centric, so everywhere the regeneration of the country needs to start outside of those areas. It's a brain drain, if you like. Young people are getting sucked down into London, and they need to incentivise people to come out. The issue that's
what levelling up was meant to do, wasn't it?
Yeah,
that was the whole idea.
It's got nowhere. It's ridiculous. I know for a fact that they've got jobs in the civil service that are based in York, and people are working from home in London. They're not coming to York, so it's utter. It's
ditto with Darlington.
Yeah, it's crackers. Yeah. So, but the bigger issue, and it's Dan's right. We're going to have a real pension provision crisis in this country that will only get seen when people are going into retirement or 10 years before. People aren't getting advice. They're not saving enough for retirement. They're not getting, they're not getting their employers and everyone consulting them and telling them that they've got this crisis coming on. We don't have the old DB schemes that we used to have. The employer does not look after you in the manner that they used to do from a pension provision. Okay, you got a work-based pension, but do they actively encourage you to put enough in? Probably not. And we're going to get to a stage where a whole generation of people, probably now that are 35, 40 years old, getting towards like 55 thinking, crikey, am I going to have enough money to maintain my standard of living in retirement? And unless you act now, you're not. And we need advisors to put this across, and big people, institutions like ourselves, to get that message out. So we need incentivising, encouraging, and releasing from some of the regulatory burden that we feel at the minute to actually get the message across.
George, from your point of view as an investment manager, any game-changing policy you'd like to see from either side?
Markets like clarity, and to Steve's point, communication in the manifestos is going to be absolutely crucial. Still a lot of politicians out there with the scars on their back from the trust budget and the way in which that was communicated. I think that would be very important for us, especially anything which involves debt, anything which involves more borrowing from the government, and what that could mean for the bond market particularly. But it's not, like I say, it's not going to be the key determinant of multi-asset global portfolio returns, but within their clarity, bit of stability in terms of what they're doing, no significant wild cards would make us sleep easier.
Good luck with that one, unfortunately, but I know I see where you're coming from. I'll give the last word to you then Dan. I mean, we've talked before how really on this podcast we're just going to try and cut through all the noise and just give it to people straight. So a client perhaps watching this, or somebody who's thinking of investing with true potential watching this, interested in the political side of it, but really ultimately thinking, what should I be doing for the next 6 weeks? Is it nothing? Should I just outsource that to you guys? Is there a decision I should be making? What would you say?
I think you should never trust anybody blindly, be it true potential or anybody. You should capture the facts, you should listen to a range of different opinions, and you should then pick a process and run with that process. And we've got a proud track record of, we've been managing money for a number of years now. I'll not put the guys on the spot, but if you'd invested with us since day one, the amount of return you would have got would have been absolutely fantastic. Be it a balance, which is our most popular portfolio, through to the aggressive, which I think was probably 50% plus since inception as well. So, fantastic results there. And that is via diversification. That's via us being independent of thought and challenging. It's through not being fixed to one particular investment style or geography or indeed currency as well. And that's navigated just some of those things you mentioned before, Peter. And that's in the last 4 years, even. So what I say to people, I'd say, listen, be curious, but trust the process, trust the plan which you set. Which could be just a year ago, or in a lot of our clients' cases, 20 or 30 years ago as well. Elections happen, new governments come in of all different colours and all different thoughts. But one thing which has been a constant throughout is markets have always risen, clients' money has always been worth more in the medium to long term by investing in assets like George talks about. So 6 weeks will seem like very exciting. It'll seem very busy and very noisy for the next 6 weeks. But you look back, Mr. and Mrs. clients, in 6 years, 60 years' time, and it'll seem like a blip. And you think, who was Keir Starmer? Who was Rishi Sunak?
Yeah. Good. Well, as I say, I think you said 6 weeks will fly by. I think we'll be coming back to this topic a few more times over that 6-week period as well. But for now, thank you very much, Steve at the end, George in the middle, and Dan next to me as well. Dan gave a very, very good bit of advice, which was to stick to your plan, back yourself, back the good decisions that you made, and to some extent let some of this noise wash over you and just trust in the experts like George and the team here to manage your money for you. I'll give you another bit of advice, which is to like and subscribe to this podcast as well, because as I've said a couple of times now during the podcast today, we will cut straight over the noise. We're not going to, if you like, bore you with our personal opinions. We'll just give you our professional view and do what we always do, which is, of course, the name of this podcast, which is Do More With Your Money. So a like and a subscribe, we'd love that, and it's in your interest as well, because you won't miss a beat over the next 6 weeks. We do content like this every week, and in fact every day on this channel there's information about what's happening in the markets that's right up your street. So for now, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.